I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jamestown Public School Board to order. It is Monday, October 2nd, 2023 at 5:15 in the Thompson Community Room in the middle school. I'd like to recognize all those in the audience tonight. Thank you for coming. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, does the board have any conflicts of interest to declare with this agenda? Any conflicts of interest? Any conflicts of interest? If not, moving on. Jamie, would you read the school board norms today?
Sure. The board-developed norms are to share and respect opinions and speak with united voice once a decision has been reached, execute all duties of the school board in compliance with the North Dakota Century Code, properly prepare for meetings, and commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Jamie. We have no public communication tonight. Our first item is the consent agenda. At any time, a board member can remove an item from the consent agenda for further discussion. It does not need a second. Is there anything you'd like removed? If not, is there a motion for the consent agenda? Motion by Dan. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. We have a motion, a second for the consent agenda. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving on to our regular meeting. We have no recognition tonight, no correspondence, no reports. We have board education tonight, strategic competency, elementary resource allocation. Dr. Leck, thank you.
Thank you. You do have a written report. It's Board Memo 100 that represents board education on elementary resource allocation. In recent weeks, staff and students at Gustner Elementary had really an outstanding achievement. I think that's representative of the work not only that they do, but the work that occurs across the district. And really the purpose of this board education is to provide a little understanding of the holistic kind of a base level approach that we consider when we're allocating resources. And also looking at how, while we have a base level of support and understanding that as a general rule, there are resources we want to allocate and systems that we want in place across the district, that all of our schools are different and do need, because demographics are different, and all of our schools need something a little bit different to make sure that they have that level of support necessary. So I think it's very natural, you know, when we have a school in our district that achieves, you know, really an outstanding honor. We want to honor them, and we will do that as a board and as a district at a later time. But I think it's very natural when that occurs for us to look at, well, what are we providing? You know, what is that base level of support that we are providing? How are we supporting all of our schools to make sure that every school gets what it needs, and what are those systems and what are those things that we're doing? And like I said, I think that's really a pretty natural thing, and it's also natural to ask, well, how can one level of success be replicated at every level? So the purpose of this memo, like I said, is then to outline that elementary resource allocation and to show how each of our schools at the elementary level, K through 5, are provided that base level of support for personnel, for support, for training, and then also recognizing the fact that we have different demographics, and we want to make sure that we're giving all of those schools what they need to be successful. So just moving on down that first page, classroom staffing and support. This is one of those areas where I think it's very easy for us to look at that base level. When I'm talking about certified classroom teachers, with base level, I'm talking about certified classroom teachers. We know that we have 2 single section buildings, meaning one grade level, K through 5, and we have multi-level buildings, which in this, and for us, means 2 classrooms at every grade level. And I broke those down per 100 students just to give us a sense, and I also included class size, which range from about 16 to about 19. So I think there's quite a degree of consistency in there. If you will remember, in the past, we have had multiple sections at different grade levels when class sizes, sometimes we reach in a kind of an odd number, like a 68 or, a 70, where it's a little too big for two sections, not, we have to add that additional section. We've had that in Gusner a few times. More recently, we've taken that third section and we've compressed them back into two sections at Gusner. So now that's a certified classroom, teachers, one section or single section building. I added in budgeted support staff, and that is regular education paraprofessionals is what I'm referencing there. That's a bit of a moving target. We have those support staff at different levels. We have them fitting in a couple different categories. So I think it's helpful to maybe look at all those budgeted support staff together because they all serve different purpose. And then again, I've added the per 100 students to just kind of give you an idea of how that flows in from a scale standpoint as well. So the next area that I outlined, base levels of support beyond just classroom staff. Of course, we have instructional coaches, and I've given you a chart below that kind of shows that you're about at a 15-to-1 to a 20-to-1 ratio with teachers, and it really just depends on that schedule. And this does assume that we have all three of those instructional coach positions filled. We know we're short one, so this would be more indicative of being full staffed. But that does vary. It depends on the teachers, and that's not exactly down to that ratio, but it's pretty close. But we think our instructional coaches are important because they support a teacher's pedagogical growth beyond just observations and evaluations. It's another professional that's there to partner with our teachers to improve their practice. We have initiatives like professional learning communities that are standard across the district. Those bring our teachers together from all of those different grade levels to share their best practices, improve learning for our students, drive increased student achievement. We have district trainings and a base level of understanding and desire and mission on district trainings. So as examples, Steve Dunn writing that exists at every elementary level, IAL strategies, improving academic literacy. That's our student engagement strategy that we ask that all teachers are participating in. Programs like IXL that support ELA and math, those exist at every level. But we know that's kind of the sense of the base levels of support that exist. Yep, go ahead.
So the distribution, could that be compared to like FTE? So for example, Louis L'Amour is a third FTE, or am I looking at that wrong?
No, it's correct. Like I said, that's a bit of a moving target because somewhat it changes year by year. When I looked at this one, we actually were taking one of our instructional coaches, and she was providing some EL instruction for us because we needed additional help at the elementary level. So that's a little bit, like I said, a little wonky there, but yeah, you can look at that as FTE. But that's the base level of support. We do recognize that one of the areas that we see some need and some difference between our buildings relates to economically disadvantaged students. We may or may not like how the federal government defines economically disadvantaged, but using free and reduced, federal free and reduced is the standard for that. And so that's the standard that we use to determine Title I eligibility. There are at-risk components of our state funding formula that are driven by federal free and reduced. Grant applications are driven oftentimes by that economically disadvantaged status. And so I took the time to outline what it is at every building, and that ranges from about 24% at Gusner up to about 51% at Washington. But I also included a enrollment breakdown, and this is pretty loose. It's just the percentage, divided by taken by the enrollment. but approximate student impact. So what you see even in our smallest percentage of about 24%, those are still about 54 students. And so if you look at, 3 of our schools have impact between 40 and 54 students, and 2 of ours, Lincoln and Roosevelt, based on their size and their free and reduced percentage, are about 90 to 100 students that are impact. So even in our smallest buildings by enrollment, or some of our largest with a low percentage, there's still a large number of students that categorize as economically disadvantaged and need a little support. But Title I is governed, or is there's a threshold of 35%. So you can see if Title I has 35% as the threshold for meeting Title I needs, so we have 4 buildings that are eligible for Title I, Lincoln, Louis L'Amour, Roosevelt, and Washington, and 1 that is not at that threshold for Title I. So I do think it's important to recognize that district allocation doesn't change based on how many schools are eligible. It's just how you distribute the funds. So Louis L'Amour is a good example because it's been a Title I school and it hasn't been a Title I school. I think that's happened 4 times since I've been here, that they are, then they are not, then they are, then they are not. Because they dip right at, they're very close to that 35% threshold pretty consistently, so things kind of ebb and flow. And when Louis L'Amour has not been a Title I school, we don't get less funding or more funding. It's just who can participate in those, in using those dollars. Every building gets an allocation. The more schools we have, the less that allocation per building becomes. But it doesn't go up when Louis L'Amour came on board. It's just how we're sharing out that same set of resources. And I think sometimes we believe that there's more dollars associated with the more schools, and it's all about the weighted formula. And that has a lot to do with the poverty percentage and a lot to do with census. But we do have dollars associated just with Title I. Sometimes those are resources, related to resources. I gave you an example in the board memo. The last 2 months, we've spent about $38,000 on supplemental resources, and those were driven by teacher requests, and those are just at 2 buildings, at Washington and Roosevelt. Additionally, that's at the request of teachers and administrators, we've utilized another almost $12,000 for professional learning, for positive behavior supports and interventions, school leadership, literacy training with the science of reading. And again, those are specific to Title I, so those are only benefiting those in those Title I programs. So there are times in which we have to provide resources that are not equal. They are equitable, but they are not equal resources. That's a good example, I think, of when that may be the case. If you look to the next chart, it's in the kind of at the bottom of, what is that, page 3. I want to talk about lookalike programs in just a bit, but I want to show you just the supplemental service and the interventions as a total breakdown, but then also the per 100. So you can see that our 4 title schools, Lincoln, Louis L'Amour, Roosevelt, and Washington, you have quite a few more resources devoted to supplemental instruction and interventions, and that's because they have access to Title I funding. That's because they have a greater need based on the Title I formulas and the Title I program. And I'm looking just in that first box there first. But we also have support staff. For those that are not aware, in Title I, you can't have more support staff than you have teachers. So if you have 2 teachers, you can have 2 paras. You can't have 4 paras and 1 teacher. Even if that's what you wanted to do, that's not allowed by Title I. There has to be a mirroring, no more support staff than FTE. For the most part, we try to mirror those. At Lincoln, it's 2 interventionists, 2 support staff. In Louis L'Amour, you'll see that isn't the case. They don't have the funding to support it. Their Title I budget does not allow for that. In Roosevelt, it's 2.56 instructional staff or interventionists along with 2 support staff. We do have one position that floats between St. John's Academy and Roosevelt, and that is because we have to provide equitable services. That's part of a federal requirement. We support our private schools, so that percentage of FTE beyond that, or beyond the 2, that's our share of that additional position. So 0.44 is shared with St. John's Academy. In Washington, it's 1 and 1. And I've also broken that down per 100 students. Now, the lookalike program, there's questions, I think, about lookalikes and why do lookalikes exist. There's a couple different reasons for why lookalikes. The history of lookalike is actually born in the federal government. At the federal level, lookalikes have been encouraged because, like Louis L'Amour is a good example, consistency of services. When Louis L'Amour is vacillating between Title I eligible and non-Title I eligible, and there are still all of those students that need intervention supports, just pulling away intervention support for them only to gain it back 2 years later, there's a lack of consistency. And so the federal government has said we want consistency of service. So they have encouraged lookalike programs, so general fund or locally supported programs that do similar things, that provide the same level of support. It's not the same. The needs aren't the same. You can look at Gustner, for example. One lookalike or one FTE in that lookalike program for 225 students, that's a significant difference at a per pupil level between what's happening on our non-Title I school and at the other Title I schools. And we don't have the support staff support either. They don't have that. That's probably more built into the regular ed that you saw a little bit, 3 support staff in that area, but they're not recognized specifically in interventions. So the other area that I want to draw attention to with lookalike is I showed you an approximate student impact. At Gustner, that's 54 students that would be eligible in a different circumstance. Certainly students that have needs, we can't provide the same, but I think the lookalike to make sure that they do get the services that they need are still important. It's not the same financial commitment, but it still is a commitment that we want to be able to make. Like I said, a fairly significant difference between what occurs at that building versus other 4 buildings that have Title I support, but I think it's justified in both of those areas that we need a little bit additional support in those other 4 buildings. We still need some support at Gustner, but just not the same. So I'm going to pause if there's questions about interventions or lookalike programs.
Gail?
I was wondering if you could explain, I know there are a lot of questions everywhere about the difference between being a district-wide title school or having just individual schools participate in the title program, and why we're one and not the other.
I'm not sure I follow your question. Are you referencing like school-wide title versus targeted assistance?
Yeah.
Okay, so school-wide title programs, most people are familiar with Title I being supplemental services and remediation, math, and reading. That is the standard in which every school that is a Title I school fits into that box. If you qualify, you can apply to become a school-wide title school, which means that you can drive your goals a little bit differently than simply math and reading. You can say, well, our needs are really in this area. Just to give you an example of what that might be, you might have a district or a school in your district which has significant truancy issues or attendance issues. And that is the biggest driver why students are not achieving. If you're a school-wide school, you could devote resources to those areas that are specific to your need, as opposed to a standard, hey, let's help everybody in remediation of math and reading. Well, if you can't get kids to school, remediation, are those scores representative of needing additional support, or are they issues of attendance? So you're able to drive that a little bit differently. Does that answer your question?
That was exactly.
Okay. Other questions in this area? Okay.
Moving on.
Okay, special education is another area, and this vacillates every year as well. We drive staffing and resources to where the needs are. And I want to make sure that we understand that's not case numbers. That's not the number of students that are on IEPs, it's their needs. You could have a caseload of 25 students and not have the same workload as somebody with a caseload of 10. If it's the needs of the students that drive those FTE, not the number of students that are on IEPs. So in this chart, in the last, as we're looking at this year, here's the breakdown of our special education teachers, 2 at Gustner, 2 at Lincoln, 1 at Louis L'Amour, 2 at Roosevelt, and 2 at Washington. And again, that just fits the need of where the students are at. That can change year by year, that can change within a year, depending on where those needs are and where the resources, the personnel need to be allocated. That's going to be, you could look at the same chart 5 years ago and you might look, and it would look different. We used to have 3 special ed teachers at Roosevelt, 2 at Gustner, 1 at Washington, and 1 at Louis L'Amour. The needs have shifted, and so our personnel allocation shifts as well. And then you see, when we talk about support staff, typically with paraprofessionals, a large portion of those are in special education. And I've also included in here non-teaching professionals. That's a different classification on our non-teaching professionals schedule, which is our special ed technician. Excuse me, I should have said special ed technician, not non-teaching professionals. So that position is a little bit different than a typical support staff. So I lump them together with this because they are not certified, but they are non-teaching professionals. So if you break that down again, I think you're getting pretty closer within the range. You can see some similarities for the most part between schools. Gustner at the lowest end, even though they have 10.5 staff compared to, say, 7 at Louis L'Amour. That's 4.67 staff members per 100 students, and then that goes all the way up into 6.67 at Louis L'Amour level, but everybody else is ranging somewhere in between those. But again, it just comes down to where the student needs are. And these change every year, and they can change during the year. It just depends on what services students need. Similarly, counseling services. I thought about putting this in the base level support because I think it's very similar. But if you look outside of just a handful of students that Gustner has, that a little bit larger than our other elementaries, but you're really at a half FTE for every 100 students, and that's pretty standard. They're pretty standard by classrooms at that level. One thing that does make it different, so that's the base level of support we have is counseling services. The board is well aware we have the Village Family Services, which provide additional certified mental health counseling services for students, but they prioritize that based on intake. So the Village helps us to determine, we have counselors that make referrals, and then the Village Family Services look through the caseloads and say, well, these are the students that have the biggest needs. That changes every year too. So right now, I did a check when I did this presentation. Right now, we have students that are receiving services at Lincoln, at Louis L'Amour, and at Washington. Those are the 3 buildings that have those services. If you did the same check 6 months from now, maybe that's all 5 of them. Maybe that's 2 of them. Maybe it's only 1 that's receiving all the services, but it's based on what the needs are. So we have that base level support with counselors, and then we have those additional services that provide support otherwise. After school programming, that is based on Title I eligibility, so that same threshold of 35%. So when you look at after school programming, I won't talk about that much, although we've had this conversation at the board level already. We did take that program over. We knew it was important to our community, it was important to our students, so we wanted to continue those services, even though a very short turnaround to make that happen. I think it has worked out pretty well. But we wanted to continue those programs. We keep the same supports in place or the same thresholds in place, which means that 35%, if we go back to that top list, we know that Gustner is not eligible for after-school programming, but our other 4 schools are eligible, and you can see the breakdown of staff there. It just depends on what the needs are at that building. We have 4 after-school staff at Lincoln, 1 at Louis L'Amour, kind of ratio of 1 to 9 there. We have 3 at Roosevelt, and 2 for the 7 students that are at Washington Elementary. So you can see the student per staff breakdown there, ranging from 3.5 students per staff all the way up to 9. But we base that on what is needed. Parent-teacher organizations, we are very, very fortunate. I don't know for those members of the board that have had a chance to serve on parent-teacher organizations, very, very important part of our school community. They do outstanding work for us. They care very deeply for our teachers and for our students. We couldn't do the things that we do without the support of our parent-teacher organizations. The most effective PTOs are working in collaboration with what our students need, what our teachers need, what our administrators need to be successful, working as a partner with all of those stakeholders to make sure that everybody's getting what they need. One thing that I've noticed as you talk to PTOs or you're familiar with the PTOs that we have in our district, some may have more on the meeting list than others, but there's a great deal of consistency in the core group. There's in every year that I've been here, in every PTO, there is a core group of 3 to 5 people that drive a lot of what happens at the PTO. They might have 10 people on the roster, but it's still that same 3 to 5 people that do an awful lot of work in organization, and we owe them a great deal because they give a lot of their time and talents to our kids and to our teachers and to our administrators. But they do things like purchase equipment, organize back-to-school activities for our students, enhance our teacher supplies, a lot of different activities. It just depends on what that PTO's mission is and how they want to support the school. But like I said, it's really that same 3 to 5 core group doing a lot of that work. And I would encourage, just for those that are listening in, if you are interested in helping out the PTOs, contact your building administrator or one of the PTO board members. I know that they would be happy to have any additional support that they can have to continue to do the good work that they do. The last thing that I have on here before I will pause for questions is if there is a desire by the PTOs, and I'll reach out to them through the building principal, I'd be happy to facilitate discussions about what works in your PTO, what challenges are you seeing, how are you doing this, almost like a PTO PLC. Can we bring those core groups of people together and learn from each other about what's working in your building, what isn't working, who are you, how are you fundraising, what services are you providing, what supports are you doing, just to help them all build their own capacity to continue to support. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Any questions from the board? Gail?
And I'm just assuming that when we look at our facilities committee and make some of those long-term plans, we can even address some of these issues in greater detail for even more
Sure.
equity than we're trying to achieve at
Yep.
this moment.
Yep.
It might be one of the benefits of that.
Absolutely, and like I said, for the biggest takeaway I hope that people take from this presentation, there's a base level support, what happens for everybody. And then there's offshoots of that to say, well, this is what everybody needs. What are some other things that this group needs, that this school needs, that this demographic needs? And that we try to provide that base level, but some additional to make sure that everybody's getting what they need.
Any other questions? Okay. If not, Dr. Luck, your superintendent's report.
Okay.
Back to back.
I have a written report there too. Food service updates. I've just provided a link. I talked to you before that we have Jamestown Jobs, Emily Bivens, and Warren Abrahamson really did a nice job. If you had a chance to look at that, I think it's kind of a fun, a fun look at a day in the life of our school food service individuals, and that also has the extra side benefit of encouraging some additional staff. And they were, Warren and Emily were great, and we're very appreciative that they're thinking about us. Another area that we've had great community support is we have 3 different groups: FCCU, University of Jamestown, Gate City Bank. We're not requested to help. They just called and said, can we help, or how can we help? And so they're coming in and serving 1 day a week, each of those groups. So FCCU on Tuesday, University of Jamestown on Wednesday, Gate City Bank on Thursday are coming in and helping out our food service. And I think it's just another good example of the great community support that we have at Jamestown Public Schools, that people would not respond to a request for help, but see how they can help us. And I'm very appreciative of those groups and all the supports that we get. I did update that I will be bringing for approval an updated board education plan. We had not planned for elementary resource allocation presentation, but it was timely. And there's some other areas. There's been a request for a Dean of Students update. So we're going to be shifting some things around, and I'll just bring a new board education plan for you for your approval. I'll just put it in the consent agenda unless you would like it in another place. Later on in the agenda, you'll have an assistant technology director position. When we have shifts in personnel or resignations, it's always a good time to take a look at what you have and to reassess. As we had a resignation from our technology specialist communications coordinator, we looked at the positions that the people that we have, our need, from a long-term standpoint, and the skill sets of those individuals. It made sense to create an assistant technology director position, eliminate the technology specialist communications coordinator. So we had 4 salaried positions and 2 hourly positions. What we're recommending is 3 salaried positions and 3 hourly positions, just because that better suits the staffing that we have and the needs that we have, for cross-training, things of that nature. And we do believe we have the right person that can fill that position in Quentin Pettis. And so that'll be the recommendation, to shift those positions. From a budgetary standpoint, it would actually be a savings, although I wouldn't make the recommendation if that was the only reason. I think if you're looking long-term, I think we'll need to probably pay those technicians a little bit more. We want to make sure that we are competitive with our salaried positions. So I don't think in the long term there's a savings. It's just shifting of those positions. And I'm just going to pause to see if there's questions related to that.
Any questions from the board?
Okay.
Continue.
And because we want to make sure that we are competitive, North Dakota State School Study Council is considering a third-party study of classified and non-classified positions. So as more information is gathered in that area, if that's something that we as a district want to participate in, I will bring that to you and determine if there's some cost sharing that we want to provide our information to, and learn a little bit more about how we compare at the state level, but also regionally for some of our at-will positions in particular. You have a board resolution. I'm not going to talk any more about Teacher Leadership Academy. Just I brought your attention to the signature assignment, which deals with the cybersecurity standards and that implementation plan. I'm still very excited about the work that they're doing there. They are not only leading our district, but these will be plans that are shared across the state to other school districts. And so the TLA is doing really, really good work, not just for us, but across the board. I continue to work with Chief Ettinger related to the MOU. We have, real agreement on pretty much everything. We just have to put pen to paper, and I think we'll have that in the near future. And we did have some additional roofing repairs at Jamestown High School that were above the acceptable variance for our capital projects plan. So I wanted to bring a revised amendment, or a revised capital projects plan that recognizes that additional cost. And that had to do specifically with the heavy snow loads we've had over the last couple of years at, in Jamestown. And there's, as we did an assessment of that area, there were some fixes that we need that really shouldn't wait. And just hope we don't have a heavy snow year. There's some things we need as we got in there a little bit more. There was more and more we needed to fix, so that's a strong recommendation for approval on those changes. Those are things we can get done in the very near future if approved tonight. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Any questions from the board on Dr. Luck's report? Okay, if not, moving on. Nothing under old business. Under new business, nothing under activities. Number 2, buildings and grounds. A, approval of revised capital projects plan, which is the roof, the high school roof. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail. Is there a second? Second by Jamie. We have a motion and a second for approval of revised capital projects plan. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 3, nothing under curriculum assessment instruction. Number 4, finance. A, approval of final 2023 to 2024 budget and subsequent executive summary. That's informational. Is there a motion? Is there a motion? Motion by Jamie. Is there a second? Second by Gail. We have an motion and a second for approval of the final 2023 to 2024 budget and executive summary that's attached. Any discussion? Christie, roll call on this. Aaron?
Just in context with the revised capital projects plan and the building fund budget, is this anticipated then to kind of span between that updated capital projects plan to span budget years next summer? Is that why they don't equate?
Can you state that question one more time?
Yeah, let me pull the detail here.
And I apologize with I had some linking errors there apparently.
Yeah.
So they are all in the drive, but I'll have to fix those links.
Yeah, so there's 1.17 million in the budget for the building fund.
Yep.
Just one second. Don't have my glasses here, so I gotta. And then the total building fund expenditures that were listed in the capital projects plan is 1.28 or 2.27. So you got 1.1 versus 1.26. So is there that those capital projects, are they anticipated to span between years, or why the difference in the numbers there?
Is that the difference between the additional roofing?
Oh, yeah.
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 That's the difference between the additional, what we approving in the capital projects plan now and what was originally approved in the budget. So there's a slight difference between, this roofing is an additional cost. So that balance between, or that additional, what was added to the capital projects plan is the higher number, the 1.27. Then the difference is what was approved prior. That slight variance is the additional cost with the capital projects plan that was just approved.
The roof cost.
Yeah, the roofing costs, to fix
Summer things.
the heavier load.
Are we spending 1.27, or we spending 1.1? $100,000 difference.
Give me a second. The plan would be for building fund 1.26. 1,266,275.
So is what is in the budget here for approval, is that incorrect then?
So what
I
number?
didn't build that in. I didn't put that.
Yeah. That was built before the capital projects. That came up in the late last week,
Yep.
so that budget was built on a different expenditure plan.
Okay. So we're going to have to revise the budget then?
I certainly can. I can do that.
Yeah, we'll have to do a budget revision.
Okay.
Okay, sorry for that.
Now that we've approved it, we can just revise it. Yeah, now that we've approved that agenda item, we can revise it. Any other questions? We have a motion, a second, for approval of the final 2023 to 2024 budget and subsequent executive summary. Any other questions from the board? If not, Christy, will you do a roll call vote?
Okay. Diane Hansen. Yes. Jamie Bear. Yes. Heidi Larson.
Yes.
Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Gail Nelson.
Yes.
Dan Tweeten.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Melissa Gleason.
Motion unanimously approved. Moving on, B, approval to submit the 2023 to 2024 resolution for tax levies. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jason. We have a motion, a second, for approval to submit the 2023 to 2024 resolution for tax levies. Any discussion? Dr. Luck?
I'm just going to add, there's no change from preliminary.
Thank you. Christy will do roll call for this too. Yep, we'll do. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? If not, we'll do a roll call vote.
Jamie Bear. Yes. Heidi Larson.
Yes.
Jason Rohr.
Yes.
Gail Nelson.
Yes.
Dan Tweeten.
Yes.
Aaron Roberts.
Yes.
Melissa Gleason. Diane Hansen.
Motion unanimously approved. C, approval to submit grants. Number 1, CTE STEM Innovation Grant for robotics, and 2, Building Tomorrow's Leaders Grant. Is there a motion for those 2 grants? Motion by Jamie, second by Gail. We have a motion and a second for approval to submit the CTE STEM Innovation Grant for robotics and Building Tomorrow's Leaders Grant. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving on to personnel. A, approval to add Assistant Technology Director job description and inclusion on non-teaching professional pay schedule, and subsequent approval to hire Quentin Pettis as Assistant Technology Director at an annual salary of $60,000. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan, is there a second? Second by Gail. We have a motion and a second for approval to add the Assistant Technology Director job description and inclusion on the non-teaching professional pay schedule, and approval to hire Quentin Pettis as an Assistant Technology Director at an annual salary of $60,000. Any discussion? Jason?
Did this position come with a pay increase?
It did for Quentin, yes. Increased responsibilities. Took on some, much of what Nathan's portfolio, kind of kept his own as network support or network technician. I think it's a pretty reasonable salary for what his workload is.
Any discussion? Any further discussion? If not, we have a motion and a second for approval to add Assistant Technology Director job description and inclusion on non-teaching professional pay schedule, and approval to hire Quentin Pettis as the Assistant Technology Director as an annual salary of $60,000. Assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Dr. Lex, Superintendent evaluation timeline is there for your information. and including myself, make sure we get our items in. Amy will be reaching out to you if not. Thank you, Amy, for your work. Nothing under policy and procedures. Under tuition, A, approval of 2023 to 2024 tuition agreements 1 through 8. Is there a motion? Motion by Gail? Second by Diane. We have a motion and a second for the approval of the 2023 to 2024 tuition agreements 1 through 8. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Other. A, board resolution on negotiations. Dan, Jason, do you want to?
Okay, I'll just provide a little context on it. You have the text in front of you. During negotiations, we had a number of items that were proposed. We felt kind of belonged within the communications committee that was established. And we as a board didn't want to step into the day-to-day management of those things. However, we did recognize that, a core competency of the board is to have oversight of the superintendent's management of teachers and how the working relationships are happening. And while not wanting to step into that role of managing that, we did want to have some oversight because it is strategically a very important relationship. So the purpose of this resolution is just to recognize that, we don't want to step into the weeds of this, but we would like to hear something back from a strategic standpoint, just so that we as a board are read into what's going on, what kind of issues are coming up, so we can look at it strategically to see if we can handle some of the core issues that Dr. Leck and administrators and teachers are having to deal with through communications. So that's the kind of the long and short of the reason behind this resolution. Jason, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just add that the resolution is somewhat of a new concept for negotiations. And Dan actually brought this idea up, and it's a good one, because some of the items that this addresses have been coming up for several negotiation sessions, and so we just felt that we needed to do our role as a board without staying in our lane, making sure our administrators have the day-to-day responsibilities that they're hired to do. But I think a major genesis of it was the fact that a lot of the items, we're getting tired of seeing those. Not we're getting tired of seeing those, but obviously there's something amiss or something that a different way we can approach those things, and that's really what this does.
So just to clarify, the intent behind this is basically just to get into the strategic plan and make it a visible element for us as a board as we develop our strategic plan. And that's basically all that it's asking for. That's as far as this is really taking it.
And I'll continue on with that. And by making it into the strategic plan, that is something that we've talked about wanting to see more insight into, so it gives us something that we can track to. And again, it is a core strategic relationship that we want to have some insight into, and that's putting in the strategic plan, I think, is the appropriate place to be putting that.
Aaron, and then
with
Dr.
that, though,
Leck.
what that looks like, there is no predetermination on what that looks like. So that's up to us to figure that out, but it's basically providing an avenue for that input to us, right? And then that will translate then into some form of operational plan on the administration.
Correct.
Dr. Leck, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to add is, as a byproduct of this as well, not everybody sits at the negotiations table. That is a committee. So this is just, to me, another tool that helps to communicate to the whole board some of the issues that are maybe not negotiated agreement issues, but they are issues for board awareness. And this kind of captures what those issues are just as kind of a general sense, bringing awareness to some issues too.
Yep, and I think some of these have also been communication committee agenda items also. That's been some. So how would the board like to proceed with this resolution? Dan?
I move we adopt the resolution as presented.
So we have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right. If not, we have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution that was drafted. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. We'd like to schedule a school board retreat for November 13th. And so that would be an added special meeting to our meeting schedule. It's kind of between the first and third regular meetings, so we'll get to see each other 3 weeks in a row. So please put that on your calendar. Can we have a motion just to add it to our schedule? Do we need a motion? So, five for five. Can we do 5:15? So let's do 5:15 to make sure people can get here in time from work. I don't want to rush anybody. So we'll do 5:15. Food, we'll provide some food. So, yep. Motion by Gail. There's second by Jason. We have motion and second to schedule the next school board retreat for November 13th. Any discussion? Any discussion? We'll just add this to our schedule. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Are there any items for future agendas? Dr. Luck mentioned a couple that we have coming up for board education. Any other items for a future agenda? Gail, go ahead. So.
I was going to note that I believe the date changed for the district school program.
Yep, I have that to the 12th. We'll note that. Thank you, though. Yeah, we did have a date change with that. At any time, if you have any items for future agenda, please let Dr. Luck or myself know. Under meetings to be scheduled, as Gail mentioned, the District Improvement Committee meeting has been moved to October 12th at 3:45 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room. The Health Insurance Committee meets next Monday, October 9th, 2023 at 3:45 in the District Office Conference Room. There's a school board meeting on October 16th at 5:15 in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. The North Dakota School Board Association School of Law seminar is October 26th, 2023 at 8 a.m. in Bismarck. And the North Dakota School Board Association Convention is held October 27th, 2023, beginning at 8 a.m. in Bismarck. For your monthly superintendent evaluation, we have Section 4, Curriculum and Student Support Services, and Section 5, Community Relations. There being no further business before the board this evening, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.